In this video, we're going to talk about a simple model, and then we're going to go ahead and develop this model over the next few videos. And so this is going to give us a framework for thinking about economic growth. Okay, so sometimes this idea is called, the simple idea we start with is called a Robinson Crusoe economy. And basically, just like the idea where the guy initially, Robinson Crusoe, believes he's on an island alone. Eventually, he finds out there's somebody else on the island, and they cooperate together. But the idea is, well, the simplest economy would be one person. So you got one consumer and one worker, and they're the same person. Okay, so we can clearly see that in that economy, in the long run, consumption depends on production. And we can also see, even if we go out to a more complex situation of the actual world or a country or a place, we can see, let's suppose we look at a country, well, if there's no international trade, then the consumption of that country will depend on what that country produces, right? And if we look at the level of the world, even if we consider international trade, the consumption of the world has to depend on the production of the world. Okay, so the basic idea seems to still hold true even when we go to a bigger level. So let's develop our simple, so the simple idea we can carry it forward. So, well, if our consumption depends on production, well, what does the production depend on? And our production depends on the productivity of the workers. So the consumption per person will depend on the production per person. And production depends on the productivity of the workers. So then we can start with this simple model. And so we can say, well, our total output, you could call this GDP. I'm going to use a symbol that's often used, just Y. It's going to depend on, it's going to be a function of, I'll write this without using math symbols for those of you who aren't a big fan of math symbols in a second. It's going to depend on our labor, our capital, K for capital, our human capital, and our natural resources. And all of this is going to depend on technology. Okay, so I'm putting A in front of this and multiplying it together. For those of you who like a more, would like to maybe see this as a picture instead of as a function, we could kind of write it this way. We'll have our labor, our human capital, our physical capital, and our natural resources. And they're going through some process. This process I'm going to call A, and this process is, that's our technology. So A is our technology. So they're going through here, and then they're going in, oops, sorry about that. So they're going in here and kind of being combined together in some way. And then out the other side, we get our production. So our labor, human capital, capital, and natural resources are being combined in some way using technology, which we call A, to then give us some production. So it's going to depend on all of these factors. Now, let's go ahead and go a little bit deeper into each one of these factors. So the first one I'll go into is labor. Okay, this is labor. And so we get the idea, well, we would expect overall, this again is not per person yet, but we get the idea overall that if we have more workers, then we're going to get more production, more total production. So that's our idea. And we saw this when we did our PPF. Our PPF, the limit of it kind of shows what we can produce. So if we have, so for example, if we had more immigration, more workers coming into our economy, especially if the immigrants are working age people, so more immigration, then we would get, we're going to end up with more labor now, right? Or if you had a higher birth rate, we'll end up with more labor in the future. Okay, you get the idea. So that's labor. Next one will come to, and you could think of a lot of other things. One way you can think of these, sorry, before I move on, one way you could think of these is you could think of a PPF, and then if one of these factors is increasing, so in this case of L, then you could think of our PPF shifting out in some way. Okay, so this was what we would expect to be happening here. Okay, another factor we can look at is H. H stands for the human capital. So human capital is sort of embodied in the workers, but so it can't really be separated out, but it is a little separate. Okay, so this would be the skills, the knowledge, and abilities of the workers. And we can think, well, how do we increase that? Well, this can be increased through education, training, and experience, for example. So people go further in school, hopefully they're gaining some human capital. Hopefully you gain a little bit of human capital this semester. You can also train people for very specific skills, and also people learn by doing. Okay, so people, just by nature of being in a job or a situation, they learn lots of things. All right, going on to the next one. K stands for capital. Okay, so in economics, we often use some kind of, because we do a lot of math, we use some kind of capital letter to represent different ideas. And so K stands for capital. I think the main reason we don't use C is because C is typically used for costs or consumption. So we want to differentiate, and we use K for capital. So this is physical capital. It's the same category as physical capital that we saw when we're talking about GDP. So this would be more tools, machines, vehicles, buildings, etc. And one of the big reasons workers in high-income countries are so productive is because not only they have quite a bit of human capital often, they also have lots of physical capital to work with, right? So if we have more capital per worker, this allows each to produce more. Okay, so that was number 3. And then the next 2 I'll be a little fast on. We'll come back to them later. I guess I won't be that fast. So N, this is natural resources. So natural resources include both the renewables and non-renewables. So this includes renewables like forest, so for example a forest, and non-renewables like for example oil. Okay, so these are all. Now, what does our resource stock depend on? Some of you might say, well, this is totally depends on sort of like nature or something. It doesn't just depend on that. So our resource stock depends on our endowment. That's how much we start with. That's how much we naturally had at some point. But it also depends on conservation. It depends on conservation. It depends on discovery. So some resources are hidden, and until they're discovered, you might not know that you have them, and then you find out that you do have them, maybe unexpectedly. Also, a little bit depends on the current price and usefulness. So, for example, there could be a period of time in history where something is not very useful, and so even though it's a resource, it's not a very important resource. And later on, this resource could become really important as technology changes and new equipment needs to use this thing. Oil would be a good example. Having lots and lots of crude oil was not a very great resource 500 years ago. Now it's quite a useful resource. And in the future, it might not be quite as useful again. Okay, and the final one, and this is the one that they all go through, is A. Now, you could call this a big T if you want to. I'm using A just because this is kind of a convention to do so. And so A is some kind of technological level, right? So it's not just technology, as economists define it, it's not just machines. It could be new ideas that are embodied in newer, better machines, but it also is organization and systems and formulas and ideas. So it could be things like a new way to organize a factory floor, a new way to manage a company, but it also could be things like a recipe for making a certain drug or this kind of thing. Or it could be just a time-saving or material-saving process to build the same thing but do it in an easier way. So this is, we can call this maybe our understanding of the best / most efficient ways to produce things. And so we can define an increase in technology. We can define an increase in technology as this. You get this. If you use the same resources, you get more production. Now, this could be more production in the sense of greater quantity of production, or it could be more production in the sense of the production is more valuable, maybe higher quality, this idea. So that completes these 5 factors, and in the next videos we'll come back and talk about limitations on this and how we can increase our production by increasing these factors, what kind of policies we can use.